Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature.
AmeriCorps is the latest government agency to face major cuts. More than 2,000 people ages 18 to 26 served for nearly a year, according to the program's website, responding to natural disasters and helping with community projects across the United States. Volunteers were informed this week that their work would end early due to, quote, circumstances beyond their control, according to an email obtained by the Associated Press.
Thousands of AmeriCorps members were laid off in a recent round of DOGE cuts. The program employed over 3,000 people across Kansas.
Now at 5, we are learning the Trump administration is responsible for nearly half of all layoffs so far this year. Across the nation, nearly 602,500 layoffs have been announced. More than 281,000 of those, or 45%, were in the federal government. Here in the Tri-State, hundreds of Cincinnati area public service workers are losing their jobs. The cuts by DOGE are hitting AmeriCorps, which is a national public service program.
The Trump administration terminated $400 million in AmeriCorps grants, and Sacramento is feeling the impact. AmeriCorps gives opportunities to more than 200,000 Americans to serve their communities. Congress created and funded the program using tax dollars.
Those cuts you just heard about, they're not just numbers in a budget spreadsheet. They represent broken commitments to communities, to young people, and to the idea that service can bring us together rather than tear us apart. To help us understand what's at stake, I spoke with someone who's been at the front lines of national service for decades.
Well, hi, I'm Maureen Eccleston. I am a proud AmeriCorps alum and the Chief Impact Officer with Service Year Alliance, where we are focused on making a service year, a year of paid full-time service, a common expectation and opportunity. I come to you from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I hang out with my two kiddos, my dog, my husband, and occasionally you'll find me running around doing 5Ks or maybe a half marathon.
You're listening to the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckemeyer, and if you've ever believed that national service can heal divides, rebuild trust, or simply give people a sense of purpose, this is a conversation worth hearing. Stick with us. Maureen Eccleston, thank you so much for making time for our little show.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks, David.
So I want to start a little bit with sort of your personal journey. I mean, I love the idea of service work. I mean, I just think it's a way that we bring people together and sort of we are sort of forced to learn about people we may not have encountered otherwise. I think it's a great thing that we could all spend time doing. But what first drew you to this kind of national service, and how does that shape your perspective on its potential maybe to transform individuals or maybe even communities?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me to talk about some of the happiest, most impactful moments of my life. I joined an AmeriCorps program called the National Civilian Community Corps right out of college. That program is a 10-month-long team-based program where you're living and serving alongside individuals from around the country, from wildly different backgrounds, 18 to 24, 18 to 26-year-olds. So I served on a number of projects with this 13-person team, so rehabilitating public housing, working on boys and girls clubs, trail building, disaster relief for sure, making wonderful friends along the way, being challenged by people who came from very different backgrounds and perspectives than I had, and really, really growing through the experience. So I've stayed in the national service world for most of my life. I served a second time in a different AmeriCorps program called AmeriCorps Vista, where I was focused on service learning throughout Florida. So deep rural pockets of Florida, urban centers like Miami, helping practitioners to further infuse service learning into their work with young people. And that's really what cemented my desire to help other people serve as my career. So since then, I've worked for a number of different AmeriCorps state and national programs. I actually returned to my National Civilian Community Corps campus and was the service learning coordinator for a period of time there. I've been the executive director of a couple different state service commissions in Maryland and Pennsylvania. And then about 3 years ago, I joined the team at Service Year Alliance to focus on this work at a national level. So my experience that started as an AmeriCorps member really just propelled me on this trajectory that I'm still very much on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So in your current role at Service Year Alliance, what's the change you're working toward, and why does it matter now more than ever in your assessment?
Yeah, so our mission at Service Year Alliance is to make a year of paid full-time service, a service year, a common expectation and opportunity for all young Americans. So that's programs like AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps and Youth Build. The idea being that if you're a young person at a moment of transition, maybe you are ready to graduate from high school or college, or you're frankly an older person who's doing a career change or coming out of retirement. We focus primarily on young folks for our mission, but service is for everyone. That this idea of engaging in a service year would be on your menu of opportunities. So if we think again about that young person getting ready to graduate from high school, what's in front of them? They have the idea that maybe they go to college or vocational school or straight to career. Maybe they join the military. We think that national service programs like AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, and the Youth Build should be on that menu of opportunities for them, because it's going to help them professionally, it's going to help them personally. It's that triple bottom line that we talk about of like transforming lives, strengthening communities, and fueling civic renewal in America. And I think that final piece, the fueling civic renewal, is part of why it's so important right now to get folks into service years.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We talk a lot on this show about toxic polarization and outrage overload. And
sure.
And how does national service cut through that noise and bring people together? And how do you sort of assure there's diversity? Is there sort of a self-selection that might be going on with a service like this?
It's an interesting question. So there's so many different types of AmeriCorps programs that, one, I think anybody can find a home in one. And there are going to be some that are wildly diverse and some less so. There are some programs that really focus on making sure that the individuals who are serving are from the community where they grew up, right? So they're peers and community members with those that they are serving. There are other programs where they're recruiting nationally and bringing folks into communities that are different than they are. I would argue that no matter the design, no matter the recruitment, whether you're locally focused or national, there's diversity within that. I might look the same as you, but I had a different background, a different viewpoint. So AmeriCorps programs, by their very design, are bringing people together who are different. So again, different viewpoints, backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, education levels, races, genders, all of that, bringing people together for a common purpose. And so while polarization is a key challenge in our communities, we think that national service is actually uniquely positioned to help address it. We did this survey very recently from Service Year Alliance of individuals who have completed a service year. And 77% of them said that now in their life after a service year, they're likely to engage in conversation, in fruitful conversation with people that they disagree with. And that was a 25% increase to what they said they were likely to do before they served.
Yeah, I guess on that note, can you share like a maybe example of maybe someone who started out with maybe one worldview and maybe found some common ground or otherwise evolved?
Sure. I'm certainly one of those examples, but we don't need to talk about me all of the time. But I will say, I started my first service year in AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps, having never left, aside from an occasional vacation, the 3 square miles in which I lived in the great city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I grew up attending Catholic schools that were fairly homogenous, and engaging with people who shared a very similar worldview and set of beliefs that I did. And then I had this opportunity to be thrust into living and serving with 12 other folks on my 13-member team who did not share that experience or worldview. And I physically went to other places that were completely different than the 3 square miles that I grew up in. So what did that mean for me? It meant I, for probably the first time in my life, had people who were challenging the way I thought. They were not saying, yep, I agree with you. They were pushing back real hard. And so I had to learn to listen in a completely different way. I got to become a more humble person, and a person who was willing to accept that my view was not the only view. I don't know that I would have gotten there without AmeriCorps. But we have other examples too. So like last year at Service Year Alliance, we facilitated an awards program, Service Year Alums Awards. And we asked individuals to apply to us with a story about how they bridge divides through service. So there are 12 stories that are featured on our website right now. One that comes to mind is an AmeriCorps member named Jada. Jada brought together community members and law enforcement officers to focus on how to handle mental health crises. So these are people with maybe pretty different ways of approaching that work, different perspectives about why someone might be in a crisis and what they need. And she brought them together to have group discussions and share their experiences and perspectives so that they could work toward the same kind of goal that they would all have, but understanding each other's approach and perspective. That's pretty powerful, I think. So there's the how it impacted me, and then there's the opportunity to bring communities together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm getting more and more feedback about people are sort of this sense of kind of feeling disconnected or powerless. What have you observed about the effect of service on maybe someone's sense of agency or belonging?
Yeah, we know that service years, that individuals who participate in service years say that they feel a high sense of belonging. We think that's intentional design, that we are welcoming folks into a big tent and saying you can be part of an effort to better your communities while you're bettering yourselves. So, there are lots of programs in the world that bring people together across different viewpoints and backgrounds. But we think that national service, because it brings people together toward a common goal, right? You're building a house together. So while you are swinging those hammers all day long, you're just getting to know people and you're starting to recognize their humanity, right? And then maybe further along the way, you might also recognize that you have a different religion or a different political view, or you came from very different backgrounds, but you've already started to build a relationship with someone. And it's much harder. What do they say, right? It's much harder to hate up close. I think that's part of what national service does, is it makes it harder to hate up close because you have engaged with someone and worked on something that you both care about. And then that also gives you sort of this, it gives you a network. It gives you social capital beyond, right? So that in my life after my service year, I know people that I can count on. I know people that I can reach out to. I know people that maybe if I want to have a conversation about a difficult topic, that I have trusted folks that I can have those conversations with.
Yeah, and that's really important for folks to have. I think building a network like that. What is that? The 5-5-2 rule or whatever, right? To have 5 people that view things differently and that kind of thing. But
Yes.
and I was thinking about as service year. I mean, so it's a year. You commit to doing this for a year, right? And I think that's important because if you do one of those kind of weekend, maybe the food co-op, and I'm not saying don't do the food co-op and don't do those things, but, or maybe even you do a week-long program of building a home or something. If you meet somebody that kind of has different views, you can kind of just close your head, look down, and hammer the hammer, right? I'm not going to talk to any of these people, but over a year, you can't really do that for a year.
That's right. And we use the phrase service year. Sometimes that's 10 months. There are AmeriCorps programs that are a summer, but your point is right on, David, that it's a period of time that you are repeatedly engaging in a service activity with the same or similar sets of people. So you really can't just put your blinders up and say, I'm going to push through this, and then when I get home, I'll talk to my friends. You can't ignore the folks that you are serving alongside for 10 months.
Yeah. So I want to break into another topic that's sort of in a lot of people's mind is sort of the political environment we're in, the sort of threats to programs like this. So it seems like it's a tough environment for programs like this. Walk us through a little bit of that. Like what's some of the direct impact of things like the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, the sort of stuff that they're doing? What are some of the direct effects on programs like AmeriCorps and sort of the broader national service infrastructure?
Sure. So,
and by the time this airs, by the way, things might have changed.
I was going to say, so we're recording this on May 2nd. And so this is the reality as of May 2nd. It's been a really, really hard month for our sector. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen significant cuts that do the opposite of delivering that triple bottom line that I was mentioning, right? We want to have transform lives, strengthen communities, fueling civic renewal. These cuts are doing the opposite of that. So since early April, $400 million in grants that supported nearly 33,000 AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps seniors volunteers have been terminated. This impacts every single state and multiple U.S. territories. There are some states that have been fully cut of their AmeriCorps programming. In addition, one specific program that's managed directly by the federal AmeriCorps agency, the National Civilian Community Corps that I mentioned was my first service year experience, had all of their AmeriCorps members pulled from service with no warning. They were tutoring one day, and then the next they were on a plane or in a van and being sent home. And then the final sort of thing that's happened in the last month is that 85% of the staff at the federal AmeriCorps agency have been put on either paid administrative leave, they've been laid off, or because of the threats that the agency was intending to dismiss 50% or more of their employees, there are some staff that chose to leave. And so we have a federal agency that's really been decimated, is down to 15% of their staff. We have people who are serving in the field who are no longer serving. And we have dollars flowing to communities to help them meet their most basic needs through service that have been cut. So,
this is one of my big critiques of a lot of this effort. I mean, I appreciate the idea of cutting waste and this kind of thing, and even identifying fraud if you can find it and all that. But it doesn't seem to be a lot of analysis of especially sort of second and third order effects of a lot of these things being cut. And I would say that applies in this case for sure. I mean, are there independent studies that have looked at those second and third order effects to sort of see what the impact, say, to the economy, to, just the political climate? I mean, some kind of way to really quantify the value of these programs?
Yes, there have been multiple evaluations of individual AmeriCorps programs. There have been evaluations on those who serve and surveys of their experience. We know that on the whole, every federal dollar that's invested in AmeriCorps has a return on investment of about $17. There are some programs where that's even higher, where it's up to $35. So if you're just talking about an economic value, it's incredible. That's actually the very definition of efficiency, right? The $1
Right.
could generate $17. And then there's the impact on the communities, right? So we have young people who, because of their engagement with an AmeriCorps member, a service year participant, their reading levels increase. We have individuals whose homes were destroyed by Hurricane Helene, who were in the process of getting services to get back into their home that now aren't getting them because AmeriCorps members were pulled from service. Any sort of human or environmental need that you can think about has had an AmeriCorps member work on it at one point or another. So those impacts are long-lasting, incredibly detrimental. And then you have the individuals who are serving, or maybe not today, but were yesterday or the day before. So AmeriCorps members who are pulled from their service, they rely in their term of service on a very small stipend to be able to meet their own basic needs, to be able to be housed and fed while they're serving. That's cut off immediately. And AmeriCorps members, unlike employees of most places, are not eligible for unemployment insurance. So this is an immediate financial hardship for folks who, by and large, don't have the ability to build up savings while you're serving and living at or near the poverty level. So these impacts are our economy. These impacts are the individuals who are serving. These impacts are the communities that are being served. And in the long run, I think the impact is really continued distrust in federal agencies, in our federal government. I think it tears at our civic fabric, and just, pulls apart the very thing that I believe is patriotism at its core, which is service to one another.
Yeah, and so many intangibles there, and like we know there's so much research showing these are the ways that you kind of reverse this downward spiral we're in to kind of pull that back. And you said distrust institutions, but it's also distrust each other, right? I mean,
yes.
So how would you assess how the media is handling this? I mean, what do you think that these recent threats? I mean, are we seeing thoughtful reporting, or is this kind of flying under the radar, or what's your take on that?
It's a bit of both. I think we have seen a number of pieces that are highlighting the effects, particularly at the local level, to demonstrate, a food bank. I think there was one article about an organization in West Virginia that relied on AmeriCorps members to help manage the food bank, to get food to those who most need it. That's a real impact. And we're seeing that covered by local journalism. We're also seeing a number of letters to the editor and opinion pieces that are saying this is how it impacts me. Is it hard to break through right now to have a story that people can pay attention to when there's so much else that is also very challenging in the moment? It is hard to break through. How do you choose to focus on this versus X, Y, and Z? When they're all very important and important to different people in different ways.
Yeah, it's a tough environment.
Yeah.
Well, despite all that, I sense you still have some hope. Is that true? And if so, what keeps you going in these kind of difficult times?
I do still have some hope. I have hope in our country, in our communities. I have hope because of the 1.3 million individuals who have served in AmeriCorps, who I know are going to continue to find ways to better our communities, no matter the situation that they are dealt. That we have a community full of incredibly resilient people who continue to volunteer and serve their communities at higher rates than the general population. And I have hope for our service year field in this moment. So at Service Year Alliance, much of our work historically has been about expansion and innovation in the national service field. But since these cuts have been enacted, we've adjusted our focus. So we're rallying the AmeriCorps alums community, those 1.3 million individuals, to share their story, to make the case directly to their community members and lawmakers that service years are necessary. We are launching a new effort to strengthen service year opportunities at the state level so that the sector as a whole is more resilient long-term to changes at the federal level. And we're also coordinating with our partners and champions to protect AmeriCorps and support impacted Corps members, impacted staff, and communities the best we can. And I'll say this too, David, because it's how we got started on this conversation, that we are continuing to focus on how bridging divides can happen and should happen through service years. So we're doing the work to better understand how bridging skills are nurtured through service years, in what ways service year Corps members could benefit from more intentional bridging interventions, and what training and skills they need to be able to end their service years as bridgers. So with values listening and building empathy and knowing how to have dialogue. We think that's more important than ever. It's going to be really hard right now with a field that is struggling in the ways we've talked about, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop it.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough environment on that front. Yeah. So, if for a listener who wants to support or advocate for national service, what's the best thing they can do? Do you think, as a voter, or community leader? What have any thoughts on that?
I do. Thank you for asking. So for folks who are inspired to do something to help service years remain a part of our country, there are a few things that folks can do. One is to follow Service Year Alliance. Check out the stories of service that we have on our website. So take a minute to read something good and be inspired and sit in some of the goodness that maybe doesn't get covered as often as the vitriol. If you're an alum, if you've participated in a service year or you've seen one happen, share your story. Share it with Service Year Alliance. Write a letter to the editor or write an op-ed. Help your neighbors and friends understand what losing AmeriCorps means for your community. And then I mentioned that there are a number of Corps members who are directly and immediately impacted by these cuts, that they no longer are going to be able to meet their own basic needs. Our partners at America's Service Commissions, that's statecommissions.org, have set up an emergency fund to support those Corps members. So we encourage folks to donate to that emergency fund. And then finally, if listeners want to ensure that these experiences that bring people together across divides for the common good stick around, they should contact their members of Congress. And our partners at Voices for National Service, it's voicesforservice.org, has a simple tool and a template to make it quick and easy to be able to do so. So there's everything from sharing your own story to contacting members of Congress to, if you're able, making a donation to help those who've committed to helping our country.
That's great. We'll make sure it's all in the show notes, but let's repeat a few of those domains again. So a few of those websites. So Service Year Alliance is what's your website?
We are serviceyearalliance.org for the emergency fund to support Corps members. That's statecommissions.org. To contact members of Congress, go to voicesforservice.org.
Oh, that's great. Well, Maureen Eccleston, thank you so much for making time for our program.
Thank you for having me, David. I've appreciated the conversation and the opportunity to talk about why I love service years.
That's great. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, David. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. Want to dive deeper? Check out my Substack at outrageoverload.substack.com or outrageoverload.net/newsletter for more insights beyond the podcast. Subscribe, comment, and join the conversation. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.